Hey, hello everyone, and welcome to Women Mean Business. This is our second breakout session, third session of the day. I just wanted to thank you all again for taking time out of your Saturday to be here. I want to thank Kathy as well. And I'm just going to pass over to Jordana.
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to reiterate what Sydney's been saying. We really appreciate all of you coming out today, spending your Saturday with us. We really appreciate it, and we hope that this programming has been impactful so far. I think we're going to hand it over to Kathy now, and she can take the time to introduce herself. Kathy, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you very much, Sydney and Jordana, and thanks, ladies, for joining on a Saturday afternoon. I have a daughter that actually is a friend of Sydney's, also a senior in high school, and I know that you guys are super busy right now with school, with tests, with trying to get college apps done, all that stuff, and all the activities that I'm sure you have. So I think it is really impressive that you actually are taking some time out on a Saturday afternoon to help develop yourselves a little bit more and learn a little bit more about things that might be out there for you when you get through college and are looking at your careers. So I am happy to talk about myself and my career journey. I'm also happy to talk about Deloitte, where I work, and what would be most useful, I guess, Sydney and Jordana.
Yeah,
I
so the
think
style we've been doing is basically, again, talking about yourself, your career choices, and then we're going to leave the chat open so anyone can ask questions. And so it's kind of like a more personal session. So if
Okay.
people have questions, drop it in the chat and I can either speak up or you can answer them. And yeah.
Great, great. Well, so a little bit about me. I grew up in Southwest Michigan, in Kalamazoo, Michigan. And after finishing high school, I decided to attend the University of Michigan. And I entered college actually as an English major, and I was in the Literature, Science, and Arts, or what we call LSA school at University of Michigan. And I went through 2 years of that, and I actually really liked it and was excited about doing it. But I sat down with my dad, and we were looking at job openings for English majors, and there wasn't really that many of them at that point. And so that was one of the things that was really important to him and to me, that when I got through college, I would actually be able to get some sort of job that would support me. And so he had suggested maybe taking some accounting classes. He said, that there's always a job market for accountants. So why don't you try some business classes? So at the time, you had to apply to get into the Ross Business School, and I did apply and entered it when I was a junior. And so I really shifted what I was doing in college at that point from being a lot of reading, a lot of writing papers, and uh, into much more of a numbers-based business class type of orientation. And so that was a little bit different for me, and I wasn't sure that I would really like it. I didn't necessarily like it as much as a lot of the English classes that I took, but it seemed interesting, and it definitely seemed like there was a lot of good job opportunities. So I stuck with it and ended up actually getting an internship between my junior and senior year in tax. And that was a very random thing that happened to me as well. I was interviewing for audit internships, and they didn't have any available at that time, but they had some tax internships open, and I hadn't really even taken any tax classes, but I figured it was a good thing just to try it, and it would certainly be a better summer job than waitressing. So I ended up going to work for a firm called Arthur Anderson, and I interned with them for the summer, and then after I completed business school and graduated, I went with them full time. And I started in their Detroit office, but I ended up moving to Chicago about a year later and have been in Chicago ever since. So and really, I tell people it's pretty unusual to be with the same company the whole time, and I've actually pretty much, even though I'm at Deloitte now, pretty much worked for the same firm because Arthur Andersen and Deloitte ended up, at least my group, merging together in 2002. So I've worked with the same people for 30 years. And I noticed there was one question in the chat on the transition of going from LSA to Ross. It was a little bit hard. I mean, it was definitely different because, again, I was coming from a place where we were doing, most of my classes were a ton of reading and a ton of paper writing and writing stories and things like that. And then when you get into business school, it's very numbers oriented. And so it was not as much of the issue of going from words to math. I think it was just the issue of um, the type of work that I was doing. There was a lot more group projects, so that was definitely something that was a little bit different for me. And I would say, um, and I don't know, this could have just really been more people, the difference between freshmen and sophomores and juniors and seniors. But I think the business school is pretty intense at Ross when you get in there. And everybody was very focused about getting a job and really doing well academically. Whereas I felt like in LSA, there were certainly a lot of people that were focused, but then there were, I think, other people that were a little bit more still trying to find their way. And so the thing though that was great about Ross, and I mean, so this is just something that I would say generally, was it was sort of a school within a school. And so University of Michigan obviously is a pretty big university. And I liked that aspect about it. I liked the diversity of it and the fact that there was, so many different types of people from all over the US and frankly the world that were going to school there. But it is pretty in the LSA school. I mean, it's a pretty large group, and when you get into Ross, it's a much smaller community. So I do think that that's something, if you're a person that you kind of like a little bit more of a small environment, but you want the advantages of a big school, that is something to think about, I think, as you go in and really what programs you're going to get into. But I spent my first 2 years at Michigan all over the campus, and then the last 2 years were very much concentrated just in that business school area. So, but anyway, I ended up in tax. I really did not intend to stay at all. I was still had this dream of finishing my English degree, and I don't know if I was going to write novels or what. Maybe go to law school is another idea that I had, and but I like tax. It was a little bit different. It definitely was a numbers business, but it requires a lot of legal analysis as well. And so that aspect really spoke to me in terms of having it be a bit more of a creative career where we were really I worked mostly with corporate clients and was really always trying to help them with audits that they were having, or when they were doing transactions, trying to do them in ways that they could pay the least amount of taxes. So, and really when you do that and you're helping clients with that, a lot of it is really understanding the law and reading the law and applying it to their set of facts. So I ended up staying a lot longer than I really intended, obviously. I had a couple different points in my career where I thought about leaving, and mostly it was not that I didn't like the nature of the work, but just that it was too much work and it got a little bit overwhelming sometimes. And so I did look at a couple of positions outside of, at the time it was Arthur Andersen, and then, but I always ended up staying. I mean, I think the thing I like about working in public accounting, and I would probably say now today, and what I do really, I work more with our consulting businesses than I do with our audit and tax businesses. But what I like generally, I guess, about working for a firm like Deloitte is that we don't do the same thing 2 days in a row ever. And so it's, well, maybe now and during COVID we do, because we're on the Zoom calls like this every single day in my room all day long. But prior to COVID, I traveled quite a bit. I got to travel all over the US, all over the world. And I mostly was working with clients, and so I would not always be in the office. In fact, I was infrequently in the office, but I would be at client locations, and so I always felt that was sort of interesting. Another thing that's really interesting about working at a firm like Deloitte is that you do have people that you report to, but the way that we do our work and the nature of our work is that we are constantly creating and breaking down teams, because we're very project based. And so I really like that aspect of it. I don't feel like I've ever had really any point in my career where I've ever been working for the same people continuously day in and day out. I mean, I usually will be working for 4 or 5 different teams, either leading them or being a team member in those teams, and they switch all the time depending on what it is that I'm doing. So that part of being in sort of public accounting or consulting businesses is, I think, very, very cool. Um, I guess in terms of my career journey and what I did, I mean, I became a CPA, and that's really important in our audit and tax businesses. And I continued to be in the tax business, and ultimately made partner as a tax partner. And I was primarily just, not just, because actually it's the most important thing that we do. I was a client service partner, so I spent most of my time working with clients. I worked mainly with corporate clients and mostly with banks and some other types of financial companies. And along the way, I guess Maggie was little. She was probably about 4 at the time. I got asked to run and be the group head for our tax group in Chicago. And so that was really the first sort of management role that I had, or leadership role. And I was able to continue to kind of get promotions every few years. And so eventually I became our business tax leader for our entire tax practice in the US. And that was, it's a pretty large practice. It was around 5,000 employees, and had sorry about my dogs barking back there. I don't know what's going on, but they'll hopefully be quiet in a minute. But it was P&L that I ran of about $1.6 billion. And so I had that role for 5 years, and then I actually took over a year ago as our global business tax leader, which was a very different type of role. It was a bigger amount of revenue, but less operations responsibility. It was more of a growth focused role, and really trying to get all of our member firms around the world to have the same types of practices. And then actually, I was enjoying that job. I was traveling a lot internationally, trying to get it up and running. And then I got an opportunity actually to apply to become the managing partner of our Chicago office. And I was able to get that job, and I actually took it over on March 10th. So my timing was really, really bad, because I was in my job for a week, and then basically had to shut the office down, and we have not been back since then, obviously. But hopefully January 4th is our target reopen date, so we're getting excited about that. But
Yeah. I have
yes.
a few questions about, like, again, traveling and stuff. I know that's like a big perk to the job. I know you've been to Singapore, Japan, China. Just like, who do you work with in these other countries? Because I know taxes there are very different than America. And like,
Yeah.
what does your job consist of?
Yeah, I mean, I have traveled both for clients and for what I'll call internal management roles. So when I was the national business tax leader, I would go to India probably twice a year, because I had about a third or more of my people of the group that I ran actually sat in India. So I would go to our offices there. I would meet with our practice leaders. So that would be HR, the talent. Staffing is a big thing in India in terms of how we actually get people staffed on jobs. And we had expats that were helping to manage that practice over there. So I would meet with the expats and talk to them about different issues. And the same thing when I took over as our global business tax leader, I was going to our offices mainly and meeting with the practices there to talk about, understand their practice and, you know, what they needed, how the U.S. firm is the biggest firm in our network. I mean, just as, I guess a little bit of background, the way Deloitte is structured and the other big accounting firms are pretty much the same way. We're partnerships. So we're not a publicly traded company, although we're very large. We have, I think, over 200,000 employees worldwide. But the partnerships are all individual partnerships by country. So there's a U.S. partnership, and I'm a partner in that U.S. partnership. But it's almost like they're franchises. Our other partnerships around the world are all owned by those partners that happen to live there. So the Canadian partners own the Canadian partnership, the Chinese partners own the China partnership. And so we have an overall overarching agreement that dictates, I guess, how we operate our business and rules that we have to follow to be part of the Deloitte network. But the U.S. firm is probably about 50% of the total firm. And so we have a lot more resources. And so a lot of what I was doing was really going to some of these countries that were not quite as developed and helping them think about, we're actually building a portal system, a global portal that we're using in tax. So part of what I was doing with them was talking to them about this portal and how they would be able to implement it and use it for their clients. And some of it was like different global offerings and trying to make sure that the other firms understood our offerings and how it could apply to their clients. So I also do travel though for clients. I don't really, at this point in my career, I'm not really a signing tax partner really on any tax clients, but we have another role that we call lead client service partners, which is basically being the lead relationship partner on a Deloitte client, because we have 4 different businesses, and on our biggest clients, we typically will have at least 3 of our 4 businesses serving that client. And so we put an overall leadership partner on that client to just make sure that all of our businesses are giving the same level of service to a client. So I right now actually work mostly with Canadian banks. So I serve 2 banks in the Chicago area. One is called Bank of Montreal, and the other one is called CIBC. And they both have Canadian. Their parents are Canadian. So I used to go to Toronto quite a bit and work with our office and the clients up there too.
Okay, and then from Victoria, she asked, what tips would you give in regard to overcoming misogyny in the workplace?
Well, that could be a long conversation. Gosh, I think a couple of things. I would say, first of all, I think that I've been successful in my career. However, I think that the workplace is, in any workplace, I think it's true whether you work in a corporation, whether you work for a nonprofit, whether you work for Deloitte, all of them have politics and they all are political. But I think understanding the power structure within whatever organization you're in is very important. And sometimes it's not always as obvious, I guess, as it seems. And so I probably didn't do enough observing and learning and listening, I think. So I'd say, that's one thing that you can do really early on in your career, is really just observe and ask a lot of questions and try to figure out, how did the CEO become the CEO? Who's the next CEO, and how did they get there? And I do think that a lot of it boils down to networking. I mean, I do think there's certainly some bad apples out there and bad actors, but I also think that for the most part, many people in today's world are good and they want, they want to do the right thing, but it isn't as natural, I guess, sometimes for men and women to always come together and do the right thing for each other. And I see that even today. I was thinking about that. Gosh, where was it? I was working with some group yesterday, and it was a group of women, and I was like, this is a lot more comfortable for me. I mean, I usually am working with all men, and it isn't as comfortable, but I think that just being comfortable with being uncomfortable is probably, probably another tip, or I guess appreciating that there's different styles, different ways that people work, and you might not like all of them, but that's probably the best thing for your career. I mean, I think that was probably another thing that I would say along the way that maybe I didn't do enough of, is just really being willing to be expansive about who I would work with and assignments that I would take. And I think that a lot of times the people that we like the least are probably the ones that we can learn the most from. And um, so I think speaking up, I mean, certainly having a voice, I don't think that there's any, in today's world, any excuse for bad behavior in the workplace, whether that's, being sexism or racism. So I think we all have a responsibility to use our voice. And frankly, I've done that over the years. I've sat in rooms of almost all men, and they've, sometimes when we've talked about promotion decisions, there's no women on the list. And so I've had to say, why is this person not on the list? Why are you not considering this person for this position? And a lot of times I have discovered that pushback is the thing that's needed. So I would encourage you guys, I guess, to be very vocal, in a respectful way, right, when you get into the workplaces as well.
Yeah, and I know you quickly talked about how you started a new job within Deloitte March 10th, and I know you don't have much experience of like being a normal workforce and like everyone in work. So now that is shifted to a virtual platform, how does your impact, like, how does that impact your job and the work you produce? Like, is it different? Are you meeting with like different clients? And I
It
know
it is
tax
different.
season
I mean,
changed.
so the managing partner role is a little bit different because we have four businesses in Deloitte. We have our consulting business, our risk and financial advisory business, our tax business, and our audit business. And then the role of the managing partner actually is to, and there's one in each office, it's to be the person who is the face of Deloitte in the community. So in my job, I get to make the decisions about where we decide to, I'll use the term invest, maybe that's not quite the right terminology, but invest our community dollars, so what organizations do we want to support? And that can be check writing, but it can also be volunteering. It can also be pro bono work. We do a decent amount of pro bono work for different organizations around the city. And the other part of the role is really to help facilitate growth in local Chicago-based clients, sales growth, so trying to help teams win new projects. And then the final piece of it, well, there's, I guess, two others. One is just to create community within the office. So even though we, at least prior to COVID, had a large group of our employees that didn't necessarily come to the office very often, and a lot of them were traveling almost full time. We still hear from our employees that they want to feel part of something, and they do want to understand how Deloitte supports the community. So having that, building a sense of community within the office is also one of my roles. And then the final thing is really to be responsible for facilities, which, I mean, normally in normal times, as a managing partner, I would not be spending a lot of time on facilities. I do actually probably talk to my facilities manager probably once a week now, just in terms of how we're going to reopen the office and, even just right now, the office has been open, but we haven't really had any people in it other than our mailroom people and our IT people. So, but we are starting to ease back into a few people coming into the office, and so just helping her work through that and deal with that. But I mean, I think there's been some actually really cool things that I've been able to do that probably other managing partners haven't been able to do. I mean, I've been able, from meeting all the nonprofit and government leaders in the city, I've been able to do a lot of that. I mean, normally it's always really hard to get on people's calendars, and even CEOs that I've tried to get on their calendars, and it'll take 6 months. I mean, I've been able to meet with a lot of people in 2 weeks or a week, because everybody's home. So, so that part's really nice. I have done something, I call it Third Fridays, that I started doing, where I invite our whole office. We have probably around 5,500 people that are physically assigned to the Chicago office. They don't all come in usually, but or never. We can only actually, our seating capacity in Chicago, just to give you a sense of how frequently all of our people travel, is about 1,750. But we have over 5,500 employees that are actually assigned to this office. So they either work at home, or they've historically been at clients. I mean, so 2/3 of our workforce rarely, if ever, come into the office. But that will undoubtedly probably even change more with post-COVID, because obviously nobody's been in the office now for a while. But in these Third Fridays, what I've been trying to do is really give the office a sense of what Deloitte is doing in the community and how we're supporting the community. So I last month interviewed, the guy's name is Jamal Cole, and he's the CEO of an organization called My Block, My Hood, My City. And it's a very cool organization. If you guys haven't heard of it, you should look it up. But he grew up in the South Side. He really wanted to make a difference, and he started a community organization, and their mission is really just to help people that need it. I mean, it's a very simple mission, and he does a couple things though, and one of them is he actually trained or worked with kids in some of our worst, toughest neighborhoods in the city to give tours to rookie cops of the neighborhood. And they really have to point out to these cops the good parts of the neighborhood, the bad parts of the neighborhood, and tell them about the neighborhood. And so he's really trying to instill in the kids that he's working with a sense of pride. And he has an Explore program that he does too, where he actually brings the kids into the downtown area, gives them tours of office buildings and stuff like that, because a lot of the kids who live in Inglewood or Austin, they've never been outside of Inglewood or Austin. So we've given them a different types of support. We volunteered with them. We gave them a special grant from our foundation this year, and we have done some strategic work with them too, to help them really define their strategy. And some of our strategy consultants have actually worked with them to help them do that. So he was, it was actually very cool to interview him, because he's been kind of in the news. He's African American guy, and he's been interviewed quite a lot now in the last couple months, just with the Black Lives Matter movement and things going on. And so he was a very cool interview, and he's just a very engaging, very inspirational guy. So I think our office people really appreciated learning about that. And then I have one next Friday, and I'm interviewing the CEO from an organization called Braven. And that organization, she's actually trying to work with college students that come from underprivileged backgrounds, but ones that are doing well, like what she did a study, and she really found that kids that come from underprivileged backgrounds, even if they get into good colleges and get good grades, if you look at their trajectory post graduation and compare it with an equal candidate who grew up in a good neighborhood in a good family, the trajectories are just completely different. That even, you know, that there's a confidence thing or just an exposure thing that is missing. And so that's really what her organization is attempting to do, is to get with people and intervene early so that they actually are on a, you know, can be on the same trajectory path. So we also had, and you guys can't see it, it's backwards, or at least it looks backwards to
We
me. I
can see
don't know.
it. Be kind.
Kind. But we had a Be Kind campaign in September. One of my partners, she sits on the board of an organization called Born This Way Foundation, and Lady Gaga and her mother actually started it because Lady Gaga's had a lot of mental health issues. And so the premise of the organization is really just to promote kindness. And they have a Be Kind challenge every September because they, you know, are trying to follow the adage that that when you do something for 21 days in a row, it becomes a habit. So, I mean, that was one of something our office did. We had a Be Kind challenge and tried to do acts of kindness every day for 21 days straight. So
Sounds
that's,
like a
I mean,
lot's
that's
going on.
actually, it's very different than where I started. It's obviously, I'm not doing very much with tax at all, but I get to, you know, I do get to meet with clients too, more again in the capacity of being the overall relationship for the Deloitte firm in Chicago. And so that's been fun too.
Yeah. And then I have another question. What
Yeah.
is the biggest risk that you've taken and where does it lead you to today?
Hmm. You know, I think that it's a great question. I have not taken enough risks in my career, so if I would give you guys some, although I don't know if that would do anything different. I'm very happy with where I've ended up, but I think that the risks that I didn't take were really to we have a concept of a corporate lattice rather than a corporate ladder, and the lattice being that your career is not, you know, shouldn't, for most people, it's not straight up the ladder. Um, Usually the people that ultimately become the CEO of a firm, they get there because they have had a lot of different experiences within their company, and so they really understand the business. And so I think that's probably something that when I look back, I mean, I definitely took a more traditional ladder for many years of my career, and I probably would have tried to go a little more sideways at points. But one of the things I think that I did that was a pretty big risk at the time, or I probably was over confident about myself to take on this role, but it was a game changer for me. We have these roles called lead client service partner that I talked about, and I got asked to do that for Exelon, which you guys probably have heard of Exelon. It's a big, big utility company. They own ComEd, and that was not the industry that I had grown up in, so I really didn't know that much about power and utilities. And I ended up taking on the role of lead client partner, and that was a huge game changer for me because I learned, you know, so much more about the other Deloitte businesses that I did not know, and I had to learn. I got to meet in that role, you know, people from all different types of functional areas at that client. And, but it got me into just a, you know, much different network that I had been in previously when I was just really part of the tax practice and not getting outside of my shell. So that was one. I think, I don't know, again, I don't know if it's a risk, but I mean, this job that I just took was not probably as typical for me, because I had really taken that other global role just a year ago, and usually when you take a new job, I have a philosophy about it. You shouldn't stay in a job for more than 5 years, and your first year you're figuring it out. Your second year you're really, you know, refining the structure. The third year you're, you know, cruising, and that should be a great year for you because you finally have everything figured out. And then your fourth year, you really should start transitioning the job so that by the time you hit your fifth year, you've already sort of trained up the person that's gonna do your role for you so you can go on to your next role. And so I kind of broke with that tradition with the global business tax job, but this other job came up very unexpectedly. And so I think that's another piece of advice that I would have is sometimes you just sort of have to strike while the iron is hot and, and go for it. I mean, and I think this job, I took it because it's first of all a job that I'm really passionate about, but I also think it's a great job for me as I think about the next career that I'm going to have after Deloitte. So
Yeah, that's really interesting because my next question was, where do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years? And since you're already at the top, where do you go from that?
yeah. Well, we have I see somebody had a question in here, so let me answer that first about why do you think you shouldn't stay in a job for more than 5 years? Yeah, what I've done, and I was talking about, I should have probably used the word role. And so I again have never really left the company that I've been working in the same company for 33 years, but I've done lots of different roles within my company, and so yeah, so my advice on that is I think that you get stale and too comfortable, I guess, if you stay and you're not obviously promoting growth either, right? I mean, in order for you to keep moving up, you have to train somebody to do your job so that you can move into another job. So that
Yeah, and
was
also projects. I know like some projects are like year-long things. When people say like they want to transition to something else, they don't want to work on the same thing every single
yeah,
day.
yeah,
Like again, so acquiring a new project as well.
yeah. So yeah, actually, it is. I'm looking at the chat again. It is definitely trying to move into another position. So that's my philosophy. You can take that for what it's worth. So where I see myself. So first of all, at Deloitte, we have mandatory retirement for partners at age 62. So that's the absolute like drop dead date that I can be at Deloitte, which is 7 years from now for me. But I think I'll probably retire at 60. At least that's kind of my plan right at the moment from Deloitte. And then what I'd like to do, I am on two nonprofit boards right now. One is the Girl Scouts of Greater Chicago and Northwest Indiana, and the other one is Junior Achievement. And so I don't know if I'll be on those two boards after I retire, but I enjoy being on nonprofit boards. I'd also like to be on a corporate board. And so that's something that I hope and I think I'll be able to make a lot of good contacts because I will be more in the city with this new role that I have and interacting more with the C-suite and board members. And so that's really part of getting a board role is networking and knowing people that are actually hiring board members. So I'd like to do that. And then I don't know if I would ever work for a nonprofit, but I might. And it would, depending on what it was, it would have to be the right situation. I might do something like that too.
Thank you. And anyone who has any last minute questions, drop it in the chat because we have a little bit less than 5 minutes left. But again, sometimes we go over in the transition. So we'd love to give people as much time as possible. But if you do have a question, drop that. And anyways, just like I know you mentioned Girl Scouts and all, what do you do with them exactly? Like, you're not like a scout leader, I know that, but
No, I'm not a troop leader, but so I'm a board member. So we have a 35 person board that is uh, in the Girl Scouts, and I actually have been the board chair of the Girl Scouts for the last. I have one more year, not even one more year. I have about another 6 months left on my term, and then I'll be I'll be passing the baton to actually my new chair. So we've been transitioning right now, but the board, I mean, the role of the board is really to be an overseer and a protector of really all the stakeholders. And so we work with management and help management, frankly, on this year we've been pretty involved with them and helping them think through their financial plan. I mean, most nonprofits have had to reduce staff with COVID, and the Girl Scouts, I mean, they are starting to have some live events, but they hadn't been able to do that for a while, so they had to pivot to a lot of virtual events. And We help them with fundraising. Obviously, that's an important role of being a nonprofit board member as well. But they look to us really to bring the competencies and skills that we have as accountants and consultants and marketers and um, finance experts and lawyers and everything else that we have on our board to help them with their business issues.
Thank you. Okay, I just wanted to again say thank you to everyone for coming out on a Saturday to be here. A reminder that we do have 2 sessions going on. We have a networking, they're both networking and personal development sessions. And thank you to Kathy, very insightful. And I know that although it's tax, there's so much within it, which I learned, and I find that really interesting. And again, business has so many intersecting again with tech, tax, marketing. There's so many ways to go with business, and thank you for sharing your story.
Yeah, thanks so much,
Sure.
Kathy. We really
I have a job aid too, if you guys would like it. I can send it to you. I didn't get to talk about it, but one of the things that we use in Deloitte, and we use it for internal teams, but we use it when we work with clients too, it's called business chemistry. And the premise behind it is that there's 4 different personality types. So it's similar to Myers-Briggs, but it's integrator, pioneer, driver, and guardian. And so we evaluate ourselves, understand what our business chemistry is, but we also try to hunch our clients. And so we try to think about, if I'm this type of personality, I'm interacting with that type of personality, how should I do that? And so I can send you the link on our Deloitte.com site. That might be actually a good practical and useful thing that, one rule of thumb that we always try to abide by is that on our internal teams and our client teams that they're diverse, not only with regard to race and gender and all that stuff, but that we actually have a diverse view of personality too. So
for sure. Yeah, we
send
can
that.
send
Yeah.
that out.
I will send you guys the link.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And we'll send that to our
Business
attendees.
chemistry. Well, it's fun spending the afternoon with you ladies.
Thank
Yes,
you.
thank you so much
Have
again.
a
And just a
great
reminder.
rest of your program.
Thank you.
Good
And just
luck
a
with all
reminder.
the other things you got going on too.